right, well, thank you everybody for having me. It's really nice to be on this side of the TCD Tropilunch presentation stage. So let's just jump right in. So today I'm going to be discussing socio-ecological systems, and specifically concentrating on the socio-ecological systems framework to analyze my two case studies, which are the Ethiopian Orthodox Tiwahido Church Forest in Ethiopia and the Chico Mendes Extractive Reserve. Now, a lot of you know me. I'm a second-year PhD student, and this is going to be the first presentation wherein I lay out the entire framework for my dissertation. And so this is going to be the first one. So I really look forward to any comments or suggestions that you guys may have and how I can develop this further. As it will really make a big difference for me at this point. With that said, also, I will mostly concentrate today on my Ethiopian research, which I have been part of since 2013 as an undergraduate student, and which now will make up a significant portion, basically half of my dissertation. So I know a lot more about that, and I already have some data that I'm analyzing for that. And I'm going to very briefly go into what I'm planning to do on the Chico Mendes Extractive Reserve. But because I haven't spent significant amount of time in the region, that's going to be much shorter part of this presentation. All right. So I come from a mostly ecological background. I started off in science as an ecosystem ecologist, nothing to do with people. And as I continued to do research, I realized more and more that I was missing a component that would allow me to understand what was occurring in the ecological system, and that was people. And I think this quote by Bowden and Tonga really kind of captures how I felt. There was just, because of the impacts of human activities, I was really finding it hard to disregard the social components when I was trying to study ecosystem functioning. And so that's really the driver that led me to start thinking about ecosystems as socio-ecological, right? And now, there are many frameworks. When I started in this, there were so many frameworks in which to analyze socio-ecological systems, but I found the one that was more fitting for me for my research was the socio-ecological systems framework, famous by Ostrom in 2009, for which she won a Nobel Peace Prize for. That's pretty awesome. And there were really some key concepts that I found particularly helpful when thinking about my study areas. I really liked that it had both the social component as well as the ecological component. And in the social component, we have, it looked at what was occurring above the macro scale and the micro scale. The macro scale being society as a whole and government, as well as the micro scale, which is more individuals or community members. And I thought that was very important to understanding socio-ecological systems. Now, in the ecological systems component of the socio-ecological systems framework, it looks at ecosystem services through its anthropocentric perspective. So basically, what can the environment do, or what does the environment provide for people? Because that's where interactions between people and the environment occur. I really liked that the analytical framework looked at society and the ecosystems from the society perspective and ecological in a bidirectional mode. Looking at feedback loops in particular, and that the depth of investigation was more or less equal across both systems. And this is really hard to do, I think, because it really allows, you really need a lot of different skills to do these things. And so anyone that's familiar with socio-ecological systems framework, this is a very familiar figure. This is from Ostrom 2009. However, I'm not going to really concentrate on this particular figure because I'm bringing to you guys the new and improved socio-ecological systems framework by McGuinness and Ostrom from 2014. And I will not pause here for very long at this stage of this presentation because I will bring you back later and we will talk about all the components. But what I really find it interesting is that this framework allows me to analyze two very, very different socio-ecological systems. Now, these are not comparable to each other, but I just wanted to give us kind of a bird's eye view of these two systems just to see they look very, very different. Now, if you squint really hard and you stare at the yellow circles, you will find that these are the last remaining forests in my study region in Ethiopia. They're very small, on average about 5 hectares. and you really can't find them unless you really try to look for them in with this satellite imagery. And this is, and now this is a shameless plug for the SPEC Lab, this is a mosaic from the extractive reserve Chico Mendes is buffered from July 2018. And while you definitely see some deforestation along the edges of the reserve, really it's very different. This is a very different picture about the type of ecosystem services and goods that people have available to them compared to my Ethiopia research. So I'm going to start off by talking about Ethiopia. And I just want to say, when I say we or I'm really part of a much, much larger team, very interdisciplinary. It's teams both in Ethiopia as well as the United States. And I have been involved in every aspect of the investigation since 2013, about 2 years after it started. But definitely it's not my work alone. All right, so only about 12% of Ethiopia is forested using the 10% tree cover definition, which, as I think we can all agree, is a little bit liberal. If you look at a more restrictive model with the 30% tree cover definition, you really see that the majority of the country is deforested and that the distribution of forests is very clumped. And around the southwestern highlands, which a study in 2015 found that from 1995 to 2010, there has been a 36.6 decrease in forest cover in the area and an increase in agriculture, and deforestation in this map is it's the pink areas. And the deforestation, the drivers of deforestation in this country, in this context, is the enumeration theory. And the enumeration theory states that the drivers of deforestation are due to an expanding peasant population that do not have the economic means to do basically anything but expand the agricultural production. So it's definitely a bleak situation. However, there are the remaining forests in the area, particularly in the South Ghana area, all surround Ethiopian churches. And this is a little bit of these are two photos from our churches. They're all circular and they all have a church in the middle, sometimes two. And I would speak a little bit more about it, but I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a closer look into what these remaining forests look like. All right, so now we're back to our socio-ecological systems framework that I spoke about earlier, and now we're gonna deconstruct it a little bit more as we're gonna speak about and concentrate on this from here on out. All right, so on this side, we have our ecological system made out of two different types of units, and in here we have our social system made, again, of two different types of units. So for our ecological system, we have, it's made up, it's basically points from resource units, which then make up our resource system. And then we have on the social side our governance systems, which set the rules and define the rules for our actors within our system, right? And then this box is meant to be the socio-ecological systems as you define it. And then we have our solid arrows, which are direct links, and our dashed arrows, which are feedbacks. Which is really amazing. And everything comes together for our focal action situation, where you have interactions that lead to outcomes. And normally, interactions are done by humans onto the ecosystem, and then there are outcomes of ecosystem that then inform how people continue to act on it. Does that make any sense? Yeah? We all following? Okay, good. All right. So this is how I am using this framework to study, to analyze the Ethiopian context. So for our unit, we have each individual church forest, which makes part of our greater network of forests in the South Ghana region. For our social system, we have both formal and informal forms of institution, formal being the government and informal being church governance. And then we have individual community members for each church forest. And our focal action, our focal question is, how do local community members value and use these forests? And then what is the effect on the ecological status of these forests? And understanding it this way can really give us an insight into the how this system, we may expect the system to last or perform. All right. So these are some of the driving research questions that have driven our work since 2011. And these are a few of them, they're not all of them. And the next slides are going to be some of the salient results. But again, not all of them. But basically we have, so okay, how many are there? What is their distribution across the landscape? What's the religious meaning? How are they used? Then we have for our research unit, we asked, so what is their each forest size and its structure? And how does that change over time? And then what is their ecological status? Are they healthy? Are they not? Are they having, do they have whole biodiversity or not? And then for the social component, we're asking what are the rules for using the forest? Who sets these rules? What's the governance? And then what are the social variables that can help explain degradation or conservation of forests? And that is the driving force. So that's what I'm looking at for my dissertation at the moment. So this is the South Gondar Administrative Zone in the Amhara State in Ethiopia. All right, so for our ecological questions, we started asking, first we did an inventory of the church forests that they are. Then we analyzed the spatial distribution across the landscape. And we conducted 2 land change analyses, one from 1962 to 2012 and the other one from 1938 to 2015. And this is actually really interesting, this second analysis, because as it happened, somebody found old aerial photographs in a attic, and that really gave us a look back in time that was not possible otherwise. So it was absolutely amazing. And so this is a figure from one of our 2016 papers, and these lines are the flight lines from 1938, and the reds are our forests that we were able to identify from these aerial photographs. So this is amazing. And then we also did a land use analysis of surroundings, and this is a screen grab of when I was an undergraduate for my thesis. And I did a land use of for 2 kilometers around each church. All right. For the ecological, we also wanted to understand the ecosystem services that they provided, right? So we did modified gentry transects to both understand disturbance, and these are, we counted disturbance along our sample, our transect, thank you. And then we also did leader plots, soil cores, etc. And I do not go very much into detail on the results of this, but I will definitely be more than happy to talk about it after the presentation if anyone has any questions. All right, so what did we find? So in our study region, we found that we have approximately 1,022 forests, and no forest was found without a church inside. So they're very important. They're the reason, those churches are the reason those forests are there. They're on average 5 hectares, and other studies of church forests throughout the country, some state that their average was actually lower than this, so they're tiny. The range is huge, from 0.02 hectares to 149 hectares, so it's a very big range, although about 95% of our forests were less than 50 hectares. And they're significantly distant from, they're 2 kilometers away from each other, so they're very isolated in that sense. And from our 1936 to 2015 research, we found that actually, unlike what we predicted because of the small size, they did not decrease in size. They held steady. However, what we found was that the buffers around these churches, the remnant trees that were there, decreased, steadily decreased, making them basically islands. And this is a fantastic image that shows really, so they are really islands. The agriculture fields go right up to the edge of the church. And what was even more surprising than that is that sometimes in our first, in our research, we found that some churches actually increase. How can that be? Well, we found through our disturbance transects that a lot of these areas that expanded in our analysis were due to the plantations of things like eucalyptus for economic, they were using it for economic. And we found that these are, in fact, a refugia for biodiversity, the last of its kinds within this type of landscape, with 139 species, excluding unknown, across 5 genera and 69 families. So these are really important for biodiversity in the region. Fortunately, we also found in this 2016-19 paper that came out 6 days ago that there was 56% disturbance across our study forest. So very disturbed. And there's reason for that. And I also love this picture again because it kind of shows how isolated these forests are. You can really tell coming up to them what they are, because they're the only, if you see forests, they are church forests. And again, the agricultural land comes right up to the edge of the forest. All right, so we have discussed the ecological aspect of this system, and now it's time to discuss a little bit of the social side of this system. And to do this, we did an in-country review of the church literature. We did a series of in-depth, open-ended interviews and ethnographic research throughout the time. And this all led to short questionnaires for community members, church officials, as well as secular officials, Kabele officials, which I helped implement in 2017. And those data are the basis for my thesis. All right, so what did we find? So it was absolutely fascinating. Before we did this research, there wasn't much outside of Ethiopia itself about these forests. And these are some photos of the church in the middle. And these are areas of pilgrimage where people come in. They're actively used by the community. And these are some of the paintings that I found within the church. Just I love these photos. Really gives you an understanding of how important these are for the community. And this is also from one of our 2016 papers. And this is a schematic of a typical traditional church, right? So as we have been speaking, we normally have a church in the middle, surrounded by a wall, and the inside of this clearing is very sacred to people. It has different levels of sacredness depending on how far away from the church you are or not. And the reason is because within each church you have a tablet of commandments given to Moses at Mount Sinai. And so these tablets only come out about once per year, and they're shaded by these colorful umbrellas so that they never have to see the outside world as it is. And then we have the forest surrounding the church. And unlike a lot of sacred groves, for example, India, the tree itself is actually not the sacred part of the system, but rather it is its function as a shield to what's sacred inside the church that gives it its sacred, which is absolutely fascinating. These forests also have a lot of paths to and from the church. Normally, there are activities being held at least once per week, and during, there are certain safe days throughout the month that people come and go. You also have what they call Mahaber meetings, and Mahaber meetings are social groups that provide a lot of support for community members, and they meet approximately once per week or so, depending on the who makes up those groups. And they often meet inside of the church, almost exclusively inside of the church. Another reason why these forests are so incredibly important in the Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity religion is because this is where people are buried. Now, the tradition is that if you're not buried within the church, your soul does not go to heaven. So that is a very clear incentive for maintaining these forests, because if it's not there, how is your soul going to go to heaven? And traditionally, they're very inconspicuous. They're normally sometimes just a few rocks on the ground to mark where there's a grave. However, fun fact, Ethiopia has never been colonized, but it was once invaded by the Italians. And as such, they brought in some of those traditions, one of which is actual burial tombs. And so as you see an increase in wealth, sometimes you see some actual cement tombs. And that's problematic in that traditional burial methods allow for regeneration of trees, but this, on the other hand, does not. And so that's something that we see a lot. Now, there are very strict rules for how you use this space, and they're normally set by the church leaders. And the ways in which this landscape is governed is that they say that if you really did, then you have to speak to the church leaders. But if you try to take it without permission, you may get a wood, which is a curse. And the curse can mean anything from just a simple mishap to death. So those are really clear governance rules for how to use the system. However, the extent to which these, and then they're also, just to backtrack a little bit, there are also economic sanctions put upon people who use the system. So a lot of people go there and pick up firewood. Sometimes even trees are used, but the only way in which trees being cut down is allowed is if the money of the sale goes to the church. So it's to help the church survive. But if you do so without permission, then you may get fined, you may go to jail. A lot of, especially during the dry season, there's no other places for cattle to feed on. And so if you allow your cattle in, sometimes you are again fined, you may go to jail. But the extent to which these rules are applied varies across churches. So that is something that I am trying to understand through my questionnaires is, so what does a strongly governed church look like, and does that have any correlation with how ecologically intact or healthy it is, how much disturbance it does have or does not have? Anyone has any questions about this? All right, so I just wanted to take a moment to see. So this is what the average church looks like. Actually, I would say that this is what more disturbed church look like. To be completely honest, some of these do look a little bit kind of like a garden. So this is an iPhone photo, and this is us doing one of our ecological gentry transects. That's me over here and some of my peers, and that's one of the church structures. And this is the internal wall. Sometimes they're there more pronounced than others. And inside this very colorful building in the background of the church. All right. So now let's talk a little bit more about what I'm hoping to do and what I'm currently doing and hope to continue to do for my dissertation. So for my dissertation, I'm really working with about 398 respondents for short questionnaires for community members. And there we have questions about we try to understand wealth, distance to access to the church itself, how much social cohesion there is, how much do people rely on the church for their everyday benefits, or things like if you're sick, where do you go to? If you help with your family, who do you go to, etc. And we also have some church official questionnaires and some Kabele official questionnaires, trying to understand how much the church interact with the actual governance, political governance, etc. And these are, I'm currently analyzing the respondents' data, and I am inputting the other information. And these are my field assistants. They were the best. They're the stars. All right. So I am currently doing, as I mentioned, I'm doing the coding, the data input, and so this information and this data are still to come. And we're exploring both software and techniques. I'm currently organizing the data to do a principal component analysis, so to analyze these data. And these are some preliminary results. So these are still to be refined, shall we say. But I just pulled a few questions that I think are very interesting that fit with this presentation. So this is one of our questions. Have you gone to the church during the week? And if so, why? So this does not add to 100, but you could choose multiple reasons for why you go to church during the week. The majority of them, this is some of the ecosystem services, right, that these churches provide. Some of them go to pray. Some of them go to work for the church itself or to meet with the priest. And so these are the center of Ethiopian community, really. This is a place where government officials go, for example, to vaccinate people, because everybody they know that these people are going to be there, and it's the perfect place to interact with them. Now, this is some of the questions that I'm looking at to see how how strong governance is. So if you saw someone breaking the church forest rules for protection, whom would you tell? And the majority of people say the head priest or the forest guard or another authority. And this is for the Kabeli authority, the government official. And so do these vary across our study sites? And if so, are they correlated with increased disturbance or not? That's what I'm looking at. And also really interesting, as an individual person, would you actually, if you observe someone letting cattle into the forest, and that's one of the things that is a big no-no, then would you actually, then did you report the person actually to a person of authority? And only 63% said yes, and 36% said no. Really interesting. Why? Right. And so that is what I am currently analyzing for my dissertation. I will probably make up 2 chapters as I continue to analyze. All right. And so the next stage of my research, which I'm really excited about, is working in the Chico Mendes Extractive Reserve, which we are all very familiar with, as many members of our staff have worked there in the past or continue to work there, including students. So I'm not going to really talk very much about it. And I have to thank the TCD field grants that allow me to go there as a person who has never been even in Brazil, to really make the connections that were necessary for me to do, to go there now this summer and do research. And this is a map of it, which I find amazing, from a recent paper. And the Chico Mendes Reserve is in Acre, Brazil, in Southwestern. It's just amazing. Right. So again, I'm using the socio-ecological framework to analyze this study region. And for the Brazilian context, I'm looking at my forest products, such as Brazil nuts, so the trees, as my research unit. Then the research itself as the research system. Then the Instituto Chico Mendes as a government system, as well as 5 local associations that within the reserve. And it's going to be, our actors are going to be the individual household. And the focal questions is, what type of extractivism and to what intensity occurs in the system, and how does that affect the biodiversity of medium and large-sized mammals? Now, based on my experience on the Ethiopian context, I think it was very clear to me the importance of really going there, speaking with people, and understanding what are the questions that they have, or how that they perceive the environment, in order to understand what questions to ask, to understand these feedbacks. And so this is very much reflected in where I currently am in my research, wherein my ecological questions are a little bit more defined. So I'm working, really excited to work with WWF in various institutions in Acre to set up a system of 120 camera traps or so to examine the diversity of medium and large-sized mammals. And that's happening this summer. I'm really excited. And I think that I would be doing a disservice to go there with questions already prepared. So I think that I'm also taking the summer to continue to develop with community members, have conversations with community members to develop the precise questions that will make up the social part of